So my name is Christian Kuto, aka CoU'RaGe, aka Coup Hustle Hard. I am a member of the Auburn Hip Hop Congress. I also am an MC and a hip hop artist, and I work for a company called Granite Wellness Centers. I'm an adolescent drug and alcohol counselor. Great question. Do I think addiction should be talked about in schools? And if so, who should be doing the talking, I think? Absolutely. I think that it's important for us to start talking about things that are taboo subjects like addiction and depression and mental health. And I think we should do it early and often. And as far as who should do the talking, me. I'm currently working on some programs with Granite Wellness Center where we're in the high schools, but we are working on getting into the middle schools and doing something similar education around substance use in the elementary schools as well. I think that it's very important for us to have these conversations because a lot of times they're conversations that a lot of people don't want to have. Another great question, a harm reduction. So harm reduction is basically trying to offer services to people. Well, in the sense of addiction, harm reduction is offering resources and services to people who may not be ready to stop using drugs. So for instance, not everybody is ready to be in a place in recovery. So with harm reduction, we offer, clean needles, Narcan, and like fentanyl test strips and different things so that if someone chooses to use, at least they can do it as safely and responsibly as possible. For instance, say someone that I know is really deep in their addiction and they're not ready to stop using. I would offer them Narcan because Narcan can help reverse an overdose and save someone's life. I would offer them, if they're using substances intravenously with needles, I would offer them clean needles. That way they don't have to share needles and pass along diseases that like hepatitis and HIV and things like that. And offer like fentanyl test strips so that if they are using substances, we're finding that a lot of substances nowadays are being laced with fentanyl. And so that would give them an opportunity to test their drugs so that they can be safe while using it. Of course, we don't want people using drugs, but we also understand and recognize that some people aren't ready to stop using. And so we'd like to try to give them the opportunity to use in a way that's safer for themselves. And what I find is that it has actually done a lot to save a lot of lives. So, absolutely. What I have found in my work is that a lot of times they go hand in hand. People that are really deep in their using and are addicted to drugs have a lot of mental health problems that come with addiction, that come with continual use. And a lot of times people that are really in a place where they're not very healthy in their mental health, a lot of times they're struggling with addiction. In the field that I work, we call it a dual diagnosis. So someone may have a problem with anxiety or depression and using substances as well. So great question. Groups. Wow. It happens quite often. I find that a lot of times people, the demographic that I work with, it's, kids from 12 to 17, and then I have an older transitional age group, which is like 16 to 24. So in those, especially the adolescent group, they don't normally want to be meeting with me. They're either being forced by probation, by their parents, by their school. So a lot of times they get upset. There's a lot of anxiety around discussing their problems, whether it be with substance use or their depression or anxiety, or sometimes as easy as just the up and downs and difficulties that we all go through on a day-to-day basis. You know, I think that especially in 2021 and 2020, there's unprecedented things that are happening in our world, in our community, and a lot of people are struggling with that. They're trying to find their way. They're trying to understand this pandemic, understand the isolation that they've been put through, understand distance learning. And so what I normally do is I take the time to kind of stop what's going on, recognize how they're feeling, what's going on with them, validate their feelings, because it's not always easy to raise your voice or get upset or talk about what's going on with your mental health, with your anxiety or depression or any of that kind of stuff. So I would also offer more services like individual sessions of counseling, therapy, family therapy. So I definitely like to honor my clients and people that are struggling with mental health stuff and let them know that it's okay and it's a normal part of life a lot of times. And when substance use is involved, it can really affect everything a lot more. So I like to definitely honor what they're talking about, take a time out if need be for them to calm down or yell and scream or whatever they need to do, and then kind of regroup, offer more services. Pre-pandemic, I might give them a hug. Now it might be a fist bump, but no, that's something that comes up quite often, and it's important to take the time to let them know that it's okay to have those feelings. So, one of the things that I know from my own experiences and from my own recovery is that a lot of times when we're using substances, especially for prolonged periods of time, we're not eating right, we're not sleeping right, right? So just that in itself, not eating right and not sleeping right, throws the human body off. Then you add a substance to it, and the way that makes you feel emotionally, mentally, physically, could make you jittery, it could make you feel super high or super low. So what I know is that the human body isn't supposed to use drugs, and especially use drugs for prolonged periods of time. I know that in my own struggles and in my addiction, that I would go long periods of time where I wouldn't sleep as much as I should, and that takes its toll on you. And so what I run into quite frequently is people who are struggling with just the normal things that come along, right? With eating and sleeping. Then you add the pressures of life, of school, of your parents, your friends, all of that stuff, and it can make things a whole lot more difficult. So what I recommend is people to honor how they feel, even if they're using substances. But at the same time, I don't want people obviously using drugs, but I also understand kind of how it goes. So what I do, excuse me, is I recommend people really take the time to understand their bodies, understand what it is that they need, and try to remember that they're human beings and that they have heart and lungs and blood and all these things that are going on inside of our bodies and our brains. And when using any kind of substance, that kind of throws everything out of whack. You know, I run into a lot of times where people think that they're quote unquote crazy because they're not taking very good care of themselves. And that kind of amplifies the way that they're feeling, the way that they're thinking, some of the behavior that they're going through. So it's a very real thing. I also recommend that people have open conversations with their doctors, with their primary care physicians. I think a lot of times with myself, I always looked at people in authority like that as the ops or the enemy or something. But in reality, they're just people and they care. And so I suggest having open conversations with your primary care doctor about your use, about what you should be doing, how long you should be sleeping, how much you should be eating, and then try to find a balance. But in reality, I think drug use over long periods of time is going to cause mental health issues. It's going to cause different forms of psychosis, if you will. So it's important to find a balance if you're going to use it all. I would start with giving them a hug, letting them know that as their friend or loved one, that you can only imagine how difficult things must be for them. That the next thing I would do is let them know that they're not a bad person, that mental health and substance use and addiction are very human things to experience. And so I would suggest letting them know that it's okay, letting them know that there are people and organizations and community resources available for them, and that sometimes just taking the time to educate themselves is super important. Then I would give them my phone number and tell them to give me a call, because I could totally help support them and show them that there are things available. Organizations like Granite Wellness Center, where I work, where they can get educated, they can get support, they can get counseling, they can get therapy. A lot of times it's difficult to admit when we have a problem. And so what I suggest is people just come in and have an open conversation. I think that at Granite Wellness Centers with adolescents, I'm able to kind of work on, I basically custom make a treatment plan for them. So I would suggest giving your friend my phone number and having them give me a call, and I will do what I can to help support them and educate them. So. I do not. I think that a lot of times in our society, people look at people that are struggling with addiction as morally bad, if that makes sense. The thing that I like to tell people about addiction is it's not a moral issue. Addiction is something that a lot of people struggle with. It can be passed along from family to family in our genes. There is a gene of addiction. It also can have to do with the trauma that we deal with, the environment we're raised in. And so I think that labeling mental health and addiction the way that we do in our society also puts a big stigma on it. And I think that now we need to kind of change the way that we address and package addiction and mental health. I think that there's words that we can use that make us feel better about it, like wellness. Instead of you're a drug addict, it's you're struggling with some issues right now. I think that there's ways that we can go about addressing it that will make people feel a lot more comfortable with it. I think we have a long way to go in this society, but I do feel like people are more comfortable listening to people like myself talk about it, and so that's a good start. Very different. Imagine if you struggle with bipolar disorder or something as common as just depression or an anxiety disorder. When you add substances to it, that really heightens a lot of the feelings. So when you're already feeling anxious or you're already feeling super low, and you add substances to the mix, your body, it changes the way that your body and your brain release dopamine. So what dopamine is a chemical that your body, your brain releases when you need to feel happy or feel some sort of pleasure, right? And when you add substances to the mix, the substance triggers that, and it does what's called a dopamine dump. So all of the dopamine gets released into your brain at the same time. And what happens is once you come down from that high, then you go into a low or a come down period where your brain doesn't have any dopamine for the normal things that you're supposed to feel happy and those normal feelings that we would go through in a day. There's no dopamine left. So while your brain and your body are producing more dopamine, your body is going through a low, and a lot of times it can put us in a very anxious and depressed state. And I think that in itself is complicated, but that, when you're already feeling super low or feeling super down, and you add addiction and substances to it, then your lows are going to be a lot lower. Your highs are going to be a lot higher. And then the more that you use those substances and the more your body goes into that stage of addiction, the neural pathways in your brain, they rewire themselves so that you aren't working like you normally would. And it makes it even more difficult for just normal everyday things that we're supposed to do to get pleasure, like smiling and laughing and things like that. For myself, it's taken a lifetime of experiences with my own recovery, with my children, with my loved ones. So it's something that I have kind of trained myself to experience and kind of recognize. But what I would say for the untrained eye is, normal behavior, right? So we're all different. We all experience life differently. We all experience happiness differently, sadness differently. If someone that you know or you care about is isolating themselves, is not sleeping like they normally do, not eating like they normally do, they're eating more, they're eating less, they're sleeping more, or they're sleeping less. They're more agitated. Those types of things are what I call red flags. For instance, say you have a friend that you know at school and they're normally very positive and happy-go-lucky. Every day you guys meet at lunch and it's a routine that you guys kind of go through. All of a sudden your friend's not showing up when they're supposed to, they're not eating lunch, or they're extra angry or agitated. Those are what we call red flags. And in those situations, I think that it's very important to just not to like badger your friend or accuse your friend, but what I find a lot of times is if you just approach them in a loving, positive way and you say, hey, what's going on? I've noticed that you're acting differently. And you don't do it in a way that's negative. I think as a friend, they'll tell you, I'm struggling right now, or this is what's going on. A lot of times you just have to listen. You have to listen to what they say, but you also have to listen to their body language, to the way that they carry themselves, like those kind of things. It's normally, for me, normally it's like, it's something that a lot of people don't notice, but then once you do, then you're like, oh, like I remember now, I saw the signs, I saw these different things. So I think it's going to be different for everybody, but I think if you just approach them in a positive and loving way and be willing to listen to what they have to say, a lot of times they'll tell you. Yes, I absolutely do. For me personally, I was raised in a very religious kind of way. My family was Catholic, and so that kind of turned me away from religion a lot. And when I got to a place where it was time to work on myself in my own recovery, the spiritualism that I found in my higher power and that kind of stuff helped me immensely, right? So when we feel like we're alone in anything, it's hard. Human beings are social people. We need support, right? So what I find with my spiritual beliefs is that I'm able to, for lack of a better term, I guess, give it to God. When things get really difficult or I'm having a really difficult day, it's okay for me, excuse me, to turn it over to my higher power. And I think that with recovery, it's very important. You don't need church necessarily. You don't need that kind of structure, but to have your own connection with your higher power is very important. And I think that it can go a long way in your own personal recovery. So, yeah. Yeah, it wasn't easy. I think growing up Catholic, I still have a lot of guilt that I want to put on things, and I have to constantly remind myself that it's okay that I feel that way, but my higher power doesn't hold things against me like that. When I was growing up going to a Catholic church, which is a wonderful church, I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to talk negatively about it, but we used to have to do things like confessions, where at a very young age I'd have to sit in this weird closet kind of room, and there was this like priest on the other side of this thing, and it was very stressful. It caused a lot of anxiety for me, and I felt like I was being judged by God and by the preacher and the priest and all that. So for me now, just knowing that my higher power is going to kind of get my back and is going to watch over me gives me a lot of peace. So, yeah. How could the mental health system be improved? How much time do we got? I'm just teasing. So, I think the mental health system could be immensely improved. I think the first thing that's important is, I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, to repackage how we deal with mental health. Because I think that mental health is a very human thing we all go through, whether it's just feeling low or feeling down or feeling anxious. It's something that we all as human beings experience. We all experience people passing away. We all experience disappointment in life. And so I think it's important that we address mental health differently as a society and as a community. I think in the past, there was a lot of negativity around mental health stuff, right? And I think the reality is that we all experience different feelings, different thoughts, that sometimes we just wake up not feeling well, or we wake up feeling extra low. I think that it's not something that we need to put a big stigma on and say that it's something that is bad or it sets us apart. I think that, like I said, mental health is something that we all experience. It's a very human experience for us. And I think that it's important for us to be open-minded and positive and loving and supportive. And I think that if we just take the time to kind of listen to what people are going through and what they're experiencing, we could get a lot of the answers from them. I think that it's something just like addiction and substance use that we need to address and talk about at a younger age. Again, we as a society, we don't like talking about things that don't feel good, right? No one likes to talk about suicide until it happens to one of us, right? No one likes to talk about our struggles with depression or anxiety or substance use. But it's important that we do, and that we let people know that it's okay to have those struggles, and it's important for us to address them and talk about them in a way that's open, so that we can make people more comfortable addressing it, more comfortable talking about it. If you or someone you know is struggling, you should be able to approach the people that you look up to, your parents, your teachers, your coaches, your counselors, and say, hey, I'm having a hard time today. Not because I'm crazy or because I need some label put on me, but because I'm human, and that's something that we all experience. It's so different. So one of the things that I like to remind people is, I like to remind adults especially, is some of them don't remember what it feels like to be hungry like I am right now. No, to be an adolescent, right? So when you're going through your adolescence, your body's changing, your mind is changing, you're changing as an individual, your role in your family is changing, and all of a sudden you have all of these emotions and all of these things happening inside your body that are really uncomfortable. So a lot of times when you're going through adolescence, you're going through one of the most difficult points in life. Your body's changing, your mind's changing, your emotions are changing, the chemicals in your body are changing, right? So when you are going through this really intense time and you're starting to question yourself, you may be questioning your beliefs, your sexuality, you may even be questioning like who you are. And then you've got parents who have been there to support you and teach you, and all of a sudden you're questioning them. You are more proud, you're more willing to butt heads with your teachers, your parents, your friends, whoever. That's just part of adolescence. So anytime you're going through this very intense and tumultuous time of your life, and then you add substance use and addiction to it, it really makes things even more difficult, especially in our society now, where with social media and the internet and all these different things, we put a different type of emphasis on substance use. You turn the radio on, they're talking about perks and Zans and all these things, right? And so there's this part of you that wants to be cool, that wants to fit in, but 9 times out of 10, being cool and fitting in is the exact opposite of what your parents want from you. So it's very different. And talking with other counselors and substance use disorder counselors in my field that deal with adults, they always tell me, I could never do what you do dealing with, the younger parts of our community, because it's too intense. I'm just kind of an intense person, and I like young people a lot more than I do most adults. So it works for me, but no, it's immensely different. When you get to being an adult and then struggling with substance use or addiction, you have a whole nother set of experiences as well, right? We all have trauma in our life. So trauma could be something as simple as you tripped, fell, and bonked your head, right? If you hit your head hard enough and it's a very traumatic situation for you, for the rest of your life, you're going to carry that around. And I think that as we grow up and we become adults, there's a lot more trauma that we've carried and that kind of collects. And then it's a lot more difficult for us to find the time to address it, right? Because we're busy paying mortgages, and we're busy with car loans, and we're busy with having kids and all of these different things. So it's a very different experience, and it's a very, it's almost two opposite kind of sides of the spectrum. But going through adolescence and all the differences that's about, and then adding substance use, it just makes it an already difficult situation 10 times more difficult.